When you think of the origins of a massive global belief system, you naturally picture something ancient.
Right, like stone tablets or burning bushes. Yeah.
Exactly. You picture centuries of sacred tradition that have been, carefully handed down and tested by time. You expect the bedrock of history to feel permanent.
You definitely don't expect it to feel like a science fiction novel.
Right. But what if you could just engineer all of that? What if you took a typewriter, a turtleneck, a healthy dose of 1970s sci-fi, and just decided to draft a brand new global religion completely from scratch?
It sounds impossible, but it happened.
Yeah, and today we're unpacking exactly how that happened. Okay, let's unpack this. Our roadmap for this deep dive is the four-part Netflix documentary series, Raël, the Alien Prophet.
It is a wild ride.
It really is. And the mission for you and us today is to figure out how one former French journalist managed to intertwine extraterrestrial origin stories, human cloning, and sexual liberation into a movement of tens of thousands.
And maybe more importantly, what this bizarre, unsettling story actually reveals about the underlying psychology of human belief.
Because it is a story that sounds like speculative fiction, but the most compelling aspect is how fundamentally grounded it is in human nature.
Yeah, to understand how a movement like this actually captures the world's attention, we cannot just look at the peak of its power. We have to examine the exact environment where it was born.
And the specific mechanics of its founder's magnetism. So let's set the scene in the early 1970s.
Culturally speaking, this is a very specific moment in time.
Right. The space race has just peaked. Science fiction is shifting mainstream consciousness. And there is this former French sports journalist, aspiring singer named Claude Vorilhon.
Quite the resume.
I know, right? And according to our source material, he claims that while walking in a volcanic crater in France, he simply encounters an extraterrestrial being.
Just a casual stroll in a volcano.
Exactly.
Yeah.
An alien steps out of a ship, speaks to him in fluent French, and completely alters his destiny.
He takes this encounter, renames himself Raël, announces a massive revelation. But the theology he constructs around this single encounter is where we see the first real psychological hook.
Yeah, this is where it gets really detailed.
He claims that humanity was entirely created by a race of highly advanced, scientifically supreme aliens called the Elohim.
According to Raël, the Elohim didn't just seed life on Earth and abandon it, right?
No, not at all. He claims they have been actively, meticulously guiding human evolution from the shadows this entire time.
That detail really caught my attention because it leads to the most, audacious part of his pitch. He actively retrofits world history.
It's quite a narrative leap.
It's massive.
Yeah.
He tells his followers that all those major prophets we know from human history, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, were actually just emissaries sent by the Elohim.
Which is incredibly clever from a psychological standpoint.
And he claims the ultimate message from these alien creators is one of peace, uninhibited scientific progress, and global unity.
What's fascinating here is that retrofitting is a highly effective narrative framework. He is utilizing a psychological concept we see in a lot of successful fringe movements.
Because he isn't starting from zero.
Exactly. He isn't demanding that people completely discard their previous religious understanding, which would cause, massive cognitive dissonance. He is simply asking them to recontextualize it.
It's basically like a corporate merger.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Right. He didn't try to build a brand new spiritual company entirely from scratch. He acquired the historical branding of Jesus and Buddha, kept their massive built-in customer base, and just installed himself as the new ultimate CEO.
He's basically telling people everything you previously believed was just phase one. I am here to give you the software update.
The software update. But, okay, I am stuck on something here. If someone walks up to me today and tells me Buddha was actually a genetically engineered alien emissary, my immediate reaction is to just walk away.
Sure, most people would.
Right. So how does he actually bridge that psychological gap with a sane person? How does someone deliver a claim this wild without sounding completely unhinged to the general public?
Well, the documentary spends a significant amount of time answering that exact question by simply letting Raël's own delivery speak for itself in the archival footage.
It's so striking to watch.
It is. When we think of a cult leader, we often imagine someone shouting on a street corner, highly agitated, sweating, waving a cardboard sign.
Yeah, very fire and brimstone.
But Raël is the exact opposite. He leverages the profound charisma of absolute calm.
You watch the footage, and he is just remarkably serene. He is sitting there in his all-white jumpsuit, speaking in this soft, measured, almost hypnotic cadence.
That unwavering serenity is a disarming tactic. By maintaining a quiet, articulate confidence, he bypasses the initial alarm bells that go off in a skeptic's mind.
It just doesn't match the crazy words coming out of his mouth.
Right. And the documentary's chronological structure allows the viewer to see how this calm demeanor was his greatest asset. When someone delivers an incredibly radical claim with the casual confidence of someone reading a weather report.
The listener subconsciously lowers their guard.
Exactly. It forces the audience to lean in.
But a charismatic leader calmly talking about aliens isn't enough to build an empire. You could be the most articulate guy in the room, but there still have to be a willing audience ready to absorb that message.
You need a critical mass.
Yeah, to build a movement of tens of thousands, you need deep, unwavering commitment. Why do so many people actually buy into this?
The scale of that buy-in is critical, and the documentary brilliantly emphasizes this by actually starting its narrative not in the 1970s, but in Mexico in 2021, interviewing a longtime follower.
That structural choice was so smart.
It proves immediately that Raëlism wasn't just a localized, temporary fad. It became a sustained global phenomenon.
I found myself playing the skeptic while watching those interviews, though. Because it is incredibly easy to sit on a couch and label these followers as gullible or naive.
It's the most common reaction.
Right, but dismissing them doesn't actually explain the phenomenon. What is the documentary telling us about the specific mindset of the people who stayed for decades?
When we look past that initial judgment and dive into the psychology of belief presented by the former and current members, a distinct pattern emerges. Very few people join a fringe movement when their life is perfectly stable.
So they're catching people at a low point.
Usually, yes. Many of the interviewees describe encountering Raëlism during periods of extreme emotional vulnerability. They were going through a divorce, experiencing a profound loss, or simply feeling entirely adrift in a rapidly changing modern world.
They were looking for an anchor.
Precisely.
Ah.
And Raëlism offered something far more potent than just an entertaining story about spaceships. It offered a highly structured community, a crystal clear purpose, and most importantly, a sense of cosmic significance.
Cosmic significance. That phrasing really unlocks the whole mechanism for me.
It's powerful.
It is, because it is not just a support group telling you, you matter as a person. It is a belief system telling you, you are an integral, chosen part of an intergalactic plan.
Suddenly, your mundane struggles are replaced by a literal universe-spanning narrative where you are the protagonist.
And that is the mechanism by which charismatic leaders forge an invisible psychological trap. They utilize this grand narrative, combined with exclusive rituals and a tight-knit group identity, to create incredibly powerful emotional bonds.
You aren't just adopting a new philosophical outlook.
No, you are joining an exclusive, enlightened family that holds the absolute secrets of the universe.
Which means leaving becomes almost impossible.
It does. The source material highlights how these emotional bonds essentially function as a sunk cost fallacy for a person's entire identity.
When cracks start to form or when the leader's demands become questionable, followers are paralyzed.
Because acknowledging the deception doesn't just mean admitting you are wrong about aliens.
Exactly. It means losing your entire community, your support system, and your cosmic purpose all at once. The psychological cost of leaving is simply too high.
Once a group achieves this level of insulated, unquestioning cosmic significance, a fascinating dynamic takes over. The only way for the leader to maintain that intense momentum and continually validate their own grandiose claims is to escalate.
They have to keep proving they are as important as they claim to be.
Which leads us to the ultimate escalation in the early 2000s, where Raëlism steps out of the fringe and violently grabs the entire world's attention.
It is arguably one of the most bizarre and illustrative chapters in modern media history.
Oh, absolutely. So in the early 2000s, out of absolutely nowhere, Raëlism announces to the global press that they have successfully cloned a human being.
Just drop that bombshell.
Yeah. They claim a company affiliated with the movement called Clonaid has produced the world's first human clone, a baby named Eve.
And they dropped this onto the world stage at a time when human cloning was already a massive, terrifying ethical debate in the scientific community.
Right. This was right following the cloning of Dolly the sheep.
The audacity of the stunt is staggering.
It makes massive global headlines. It dominates the news cycle so thoroughly that it results in a literal U.S. Senate hearing where Raël himself actually testifies.
In his spacesuit-adjacent outfit, no less.
Yes. And let's be perfectly clear on the facts from our sources here. Absolutely no scientific evidence, no DNA test, no proof of any kind ever materialized to support the cloning claim. It was entirely unverified.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand how a movement pulls off a stunt like this without any proof, we have to look at the exact media ecosystem of the early 2000s.
The documentary dissects this perfectly.
It really does. This was the era of the 24-hour cable news network coming into its own. The simplest version of this landscape is cable news constantly needed highly sensational, visually arresting content to fill endless hours of airtime.
They needed a villain, or at least a spectacle, to keep viewers glued to the screen.
And Raël needed a massive, free, global megaphone to legitimize his status and recruit new members. The documentary shows this incredibly symbiotic, manipulative relationship between the fringe movement and the media.
It's like they were using each other.
They absolutely were. The press wanted a sensational story about a UFO cult cloning a baby for their ratings, and Raëlism wanted the global exposure. They essentially hacked each other.
Because the media ecosystem was particularly vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. The outrage generated viewership, regardless of the truth.
It is the ultimate viral marketing stunt before social media algorithms even existed.
You just make a claim so controversial, so deeply tied to the existing anxieties of the era, that the entire world is forced to stop and look at you.
They bypassed traditional scientific peer review and went straight to the court of public spectacle.
And in doing so, they turned a relatively obscure fringe group into a household name almost overnight. But that strategy is a double-edged sword.
Because extreme escalation brings intense media exposure, and intense media exposure inevitably brings intense scrutiny.
Yeah, when you forcibly invite the entire world to look behind your curtain, investigative journalists and disillusioned former members start speaking up.
And this is where the shiny utopian ideals of peace and scientific progress give way to some deeply troubling internal power dynamics.
This transition in the documentary brings us directly to the movement's practices regarding sexuality and interpersonal boundaries.
It's a heavy shift in tone.
It is. And just to ground ourselves here before we get into the details, our goal with this deep dive isn't to judge the morality of these specific teachings or to take a side on modern culture wars regarding sexual liberation.
Right, we're remaining completely objective on that front.
We are strictly looking at the mechanics of power, authority, and consent, exactly as they are reported by the former members in the documentary source material. We are impartially examining how these practices function structurally within the organization.
That structural view is key. The documentary details how Raëlism places a massive emphasis on a practice they call sensual meditation. The teachings promote complete sexual freedom and a total rejection of traditional societal moral constraints.
And the current supporters who were interviewed in the series vigorously defend these practices.
They do. They describe them as deeply liberating, empowering, and a necessary breaking of puritanical chains.
But the underlying mechanism of breaking those chains is where the psychological complexity lies. When a group deliberately breaks major societal taboos together, it serves a dual purpose.
It isolates them.
Exactly. It might feel liberating, but structurally, it severely isolates the members from mainstream society. If your lifestyle is considered shocking or unacceptable by the outside world, you become entirely dependent on the inside group for acceptance.
And the darker side of that dependency is what the former members highlight. They describe a culture characterized by emotional control, intentionally blurred boundaries, and highly ambiguous consent.
The documentary features testimonies that paint a picture of an environment where the teachings of sexual freedom are weaponized to serve the desires of those at the top.
And here's where I want to push back on the documentary itself.
Oh, interesting. Let's hear it.
Well, a lot of the critical reviews of Raël, the Alien Prophet, praise the series for having a very balanced perspective and for avoiding overly simplistic, heavy-handed judgments.
Right.
But I kept asking myself, does that cinematic balance accidentally let Raël off the hook for these specific ethical controversies? If a filmmaker just presents the current members' praise and the former members' trauma equally, does the gravity of the allegations get lost in the edit?
That is a profound critique of the true crime and cult documentary genre as a whole, and our source material directly addresses this weakness.
Yeah, the reviews point out that many viewers feel the documentary does not interrogate Raël strongly enough on camera regarding the specific severe allegations of sexual misconduct.
The filmmakers never explicitly corner him or accuse him of wrongdoing in a traditional investigative sense. It leaves the ultimate judgment floating in the air.
But perhaps the mechanics they do show are damning enough on their own. We have to look at the architecture of the power dynamic itself.
Because the testimonies detail a culture that elevates Raël not just to the level of a respected leader, but to a near-divine status. He is the sole prophet of the extraterrestrial creators of humanity.
And that is the crux of the issue with consent within these organizations. When a leader is viewed as a literal divine emissary, the power imbalance becomes absolute.
It's insurmountable.
Exactly. The fundamental mechanism of informed consent relies on two people operating on a relatively equal playing field, where saying no is a safe and viable option.
How can you possibly have true informed consent when one person holds the keys to your cosmic salvation?
You can't.
Saying no to the leader means saying no to the Elohim, the entire universe, and your own spiritual progression. Your ability to choose is fundamentally compromised.
Precisely. The documentary meticulously shows how this dynamic creates vast opportunities for exploitation that disproportionately benefit the founder.
So even without an explicit, heavy-handed condemnation from the filmmakers, the structural power dynamics are laid entirely bare.
Right. By showing how the entire organization, its rituals, and its sexual practices are structured exclusively around Raël's ultimate unquestionable authority, the documentary provides more than enough evidence to raise serious ethical red flags for any critical viewer.
So bringing all of this back to the surface,
Mm-hmm.
what does this all mean for you? Why should any of us care about a French journalist from the 1970s who decided he was the chosen prophet of an alien race?
Because it's not really about him.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Ultimately, our sources suggest that Raël the alien prophet isn't really a story about aliens at all. It is a mirror. It is reflecting our own profound, sometimes desperate human desire for meaning and community.
And it stands as a stark historical warning about the exact mechanisms of control.
What happens when vulnerability, engineered spirituality, and completely unchecked power become intertwined?
As a piece of media, the documentary largely succeeds at holding up that mirror. While the pacing across the 4 episodes can occasionally feel, uneven or repetitive, the tight editing and the masterful use of archival footage create a compelling psychological portrait.
It forces us to confront how easily reality can be rewritten for those who are desperately searching for answers.
It is a masterclass in the architecture of belief. Watching someone engineer a global reality from a typewriter to a Senate hearing is genuinely staggering.
It is. And it leaves us with something critical to think about long after the screen goes dark.
We've explored how movements like Raëlism historically thrived on human isolation and the deep search for cosmic significance. But we have to ask ourselves, in today's hyper-connected yet profoundly isolated world, where social media algorithms constantly feed our anxieties and segment our realities,
What new, entirely unseen belief systems are quietly forming right now to fill that exact same void?
wow, that really is the thought to sit with.
Because at the end of the day, the underlying human need hasn't changed at all. Whether it's a typewriter, a turtleneck, and a sci-fi universe in the 1970s, or an invisible algorithm shaping our feeds today.
We're all just looking for a grand narrative.
A narrative that makes sense of the universe and hoping we have a special place inside of it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.